Hi, it's Plant. Today we are reading the last two chapters, chapter 3 and 4 of Field Trip Disasters by MissCellophane on AO3. Chapter 3. Last chapter. Both of them were dragged out of their little bubble by a knock on the door. "Peter, are you in there?" Ned called out. Peter glanced at Mai, then Harley, panicked. "We'll be right out," Harley called back. "What are we gonna do?" Peter asked, flustered. "What if someone asks about Mai? How are we gonna explain her? What if someone upsets her? What if I accidentally reveal I'm—" Harley cuts him off with a kiss, pulling back a few moments later when he felt Peter relax. He shot his boyfriend a quick grin. "Hey, it'll be okay. We'll deal with it as it comes," Harley reassures him softly. Peter swallows thickly, still slightly breathless from the kiss. "Yeah? You sure?" he asked. "Of course, darling, and if I'm wrong, and that's a big if," Harley winked at him, "I will let you post that embarrassing photo you took of me last month." A smile quirked at Peter's lips. "All right, fine." Ned knocked again. "Peter?" "Coming." He pecked Harley's lips once more before starting towards the door. "Hey, Peter." Peter paused and looked over to his boyfriend. "I love you." Peter flushed. A smile tugged at his lips as he replied, "I love you too." Harley smiled and headed to the door. "I know," he sang. "I'm so irresistible." He threw in an exaggerated wink. Peter shook his head in amusement. "Sure you are." He walked over to the door and opened it, immediately stepping out as he did. "Hi there," Harley greeted as he stepped out with him, smiling at Ned as Peter closed the door behind him. Ned looked between them. Hi?" he replied, his expression unsure. MJ rolled her eyes. "Nerd," she said. Peter turned to her. "Hey, MJ, something wrong?" He turned to her after noticing the annoyed glitch in her eyes. "Flash is just being a dick," Ned huffed. MJ nodded in agreement. "He won't shut up about you using the invasion to make your lie seem authentic," she added. "Seriously? He's still on that?" Peter nudged him. "It's fine. I didn't expect him to believe me anyway." To be honest, Peter was sure Flash was just jealous of him even having an internship at Stark Industries. So he didn't put much thought into Flash's words anymore. That didn't make them any less annoying. Still, Peter cut Harley off. "Still nothing. Don't worry about it. He can only keep it up for so long when it's obvious I'm not lying." Harley pressed his lips together, annoyance clear in his eyes. Interesting, MJ thought to herself, looking between the two with intrigue. "Anyway, Mr. Harrington wants to know what we can and can't eat. He doesn't want to accidentally piss off Mr. Stark," Ned informed them. Peter shook his head. "This isn't even Tony's floor," he said, exasperated. Ned looked shocked. "It's not? Then who lives here?" He looked around rapidly, as if he could spot the answer on the walls. Harley grinned at him. "We do. Tony lives upstairs." Amusement colored his tones. MJ smirked. "Don't let the others hear that. They'll be disappointed." Harley sniffed. "I'm hardly disappointing." He added a flirty wink, to which MJ rolled her eyes. "I mean, Pepper did stay down here a few weeks ago, but that was because Tony accidentally blew up the coffee maker. Don't ask how. I have no idea." Peter added with a light shrug. "I remember that. Pepper was so pissed. She had 10 meetings in a row the next morning." Ned blinked in disbelief. He blew up a coffee maker? Men. MJ shook her head with a sigh. Hey! Both Peter and Ned exclaimed. Harley shrugged. True, I guess. The four of them headed back out to the main room where Mr. Harrington and Tony had managed to corral everyone to the couches and floor. Flash was sitting in one of the armchairs off to the side, trying to look more dignified than he really was. Mr. Harrington? Peter called out to the older man. Ah, Peter, just in time. Everybody has been complaining about food. Mr. Harrington looked slightly embarrassed as he added, I was hoping you could help me make something. Sure, nobody has any allergies, right? He asked, heading toward the kitchen. Mr. Harrington followed behind him. Mr. Andrews has a nut allergy, and Mr. Davis has a wheat allergy, he replied, as if reading from a script. He was probably forced to remember in case of an emergency, Peter thought to himself. Peter nodded. Okay, then. Hey, I can help. No, Peter exclaimed, stopping and turning to Harley. You always make a huge mess whenever you're in the kitchen. Please, he begged, clasping his hands together and bringing them up to his face with a pout. Nice try, but you have awful puppy dog eyes. Peter was already turning around when Harley replied. Well, not everyone can look as cute as you, Harley sniffed, a smirk tugging on his lips. Shut up! He scurried into the kitchen with bright red cheeks. Mr. Harrington quirked a brow at him. Nice boyfriend you have there. He's not. We're not. Peter floundered. Mr. Harrington's expression softened just a tad. I'm not judging you, Peter. Peter stared at him in surprise. Well, okay, fine. We are dating, but nobody knows about it. Please don't tell Ned, he pleaded. Mr. Harrington shook his head. I don't think you need to worry about that. He then smiled at Peter. Let's make some food, shall we? Peter gave a hesitant smile back. Right. Cute, huh? MJ drawled, stepping up next to Harley. Interesting. Harley shrugged, merely telling the truth. He turned to the group of students. Who wants to watch a movie while we wait? He called out. He got a unanimous and enthusiastic reply of yes. Peter and Mr. Harrington walked out a little over 30 minutes later to see the whole group crying as they watched 7 pounds. Why the heck, Peter corrected himself at Mr. Harrington's look of disapproval. Are you watching 7 pounds? Because Ned and Harley got into a fight over Will Smith, MJ sighed, not once looking up from her sketchbook. What? Peter quirked a brow. What? Ned thought Will Smith was overrated and had no good movies. Harley sounded extremely offended. I mean, I agree, he's not doing so well right now, but this movie always makes me cry. Harley added a sniff as if to prove a point. Ned nodded in agreement. Oh man, this movie is depressing, he whined as he blinked back tears. Why? One of his female classmates cried us out. Will Smith! Right. Peter shook his head. Lunch is ready, he informed them. But the movie's just getting good, Betty Ann called back. There is such a thing as a pause button, you know, MJ retorted. There was a mixture of sighs and complaints as Harley paused the movie. Hey, weren't y'all complaining about being hungry earlier? Harley huffed. Hypocrites. No need to be rude, Mr. Harrington stated, even as everybody got up to go to the kitchen. Harley shrugged in reply. Got them up, didn't it? They spent the next 6 hours having a movie marathon, but a group of teenagers could stay still for only so long. As soon as the last movie ended, Flash stood up. I'm so bored. Pete, Parker, entertain us, he huffed, just barely keeping himself from using that distasteful nickname. Tony was staring at him with a look of utter contempt. Why should he be the one to entertain you? Tony asked dryly. Because he's the reason we're even here. But we're supposed to be touring Stark Towers, but thanks to the wimps need to prove himself, we're stuck. Flash complained. Excuse you, Harley snapped. Are you suggesting Peter set up a fucking invasion just to prove a point? You really are stupid. Flash narrowed his eyes. What did you just say to me? Flash stepped closer to him with a scowl. Mr. Harrington stepped forward with his hands held up. Let's all calm down now. No, I want to know what his fucking problem is with Peter. As far as I'm aware, he never did shit to you, Harley exclaimed. Ignoring Mr. Harrington's language, Peter set a hand on Harley's shoulder, adding, It doesn't matter, Harley. He's just a bully. Aw, look, your little boyfriend's sticking up for you, Flash cooed tauntingly. At least he has someone who loves him enough to date him. I bet you'll never have a girlfriend, Harley immediately retorted mockingly. Peter flushed. Harley! He exclaimed in surprise. You little shit. Flash rushed forward with his arms raised into a fist. He thankfully didn't get far as Lucas, one of their classmates, caught his arm. Really? Are you trying to get expelled? Lucas rolled his eyes. Flash snarled at him. Fuck off. Peter, Harry? A soft voice called from the hallway. Peter and Harley shared startled looks. Shit, Harley cursed. Don't just stand there. Peter shoved him towards the hall entrance. But before Harley could get a few feet, a small brunette walked out of the hallway. What's going on? Mai asked. She looked around the room with sleepy eyes, one hand holding a stuffed tiger to her chest, while the other rubbed at her eyes. Who the fuck's the kid? Flash asked with an annoyed glare. Peter didn't know what to say. Mai, did we wake you up? Harley asked, sheepish. Mai nodded. Heard shouting, she replied, stumbling over to Harley, who easily picked her up. Sorry, we'll try to be more quiet, Peter told her. Anyone gonna answer me? Flash hissed. Mr. Harrington frowned. I would also like to know. Harley and Peter shared a look. Harley shrugged. She's the daughter of a friend of ours. We're babysitting for them. Mai looked confused. Harley, why don't you go get her some food? She must be hungry, right, Mai? He smiled hesitantly at her. Mai nodded. Cookies? She asked hopefully. Harley was about to agree, but Peter shook his head. You've had them every day for the past week. Mai pouted. Please. Her eyes wide and teary. Harley turned his own puppy dog eyes on Peter. Please, Peter, Harley added. Peter pressed his lips together. I know what you're doing. It's not going to work. They continued to stare at him. Peter's classmates watched the whole thing in a mixture of amusement and confusion. Ugh, fine. Just 2, though. No more, okay? He narrowed his eyes playfully at them. Mai beamed. Yay! She threw her arms up happily. Harley grinned. Let's go get you some cookies, he sang, bringing her into the kitchen. What the fuck? Flash deadpanned. Language, Mr. Harrington reminded him. Dude, you didn't tell me you were babysitting someone, Ned said in bewilderment. I don't remember you saying you had a boyfriend either, he added, feeling slightly hurt. Peter winced. Ah, right. I'm sorry. He turned apologetic eyes on Ned. I wasn't sure how to tell you. MJ snorted. That sounded more like a question. Peter sighed. Yeah, but I really am sorry, but I swear I had a good reason. Ned nodded. All right. And I swear I didn't mean to. Wait. Peter looked at him in surprise. All right? Ned nodded. Yeah. If you say you had a good reason for not telling me, then I believe you. You're like the most honest person I have ever met, so you must have had a valid reason. MJ hummed in agreement. You're also a shit actor. I had a feeling you were seeing someone, she added. Peter sputtered. What? How? When? What? MJ rolled her eyes. Seriously? It wasn't that hard to figure out. You have the biggest hard eyes when you two text each other. Peter flushed in embarrassment. Enough about Peter's shit taste. Who the fuck was that kid? Flash interrupted. He hated being ignored. Peter mentally groaned, but turned around, not only to see Flash glaring at him, but everyone else watching in curiosity. He flushed even more. MJ nudged him again. Right, what did you want to know again? Perhaps you could start with the girl, Tony suggested, before Flash could open his mouth again. Right. Peter cleared his throat. That was mine. Harley and I are babysitting her. Technically, they were. It was just a permanent type of babysitting. They didn't need to know that part, though. Whose kid is she? Is she Tony and Pepper's secret love child? What if she belongs to the Black Widow? Peter blinked in shock at the sudden noise. MJ, noting his discomfort, turned a glare on Mr. Harrington. Thankfully, her teacher seemed to realize what she wanted as he cleared his throat. Quiet! Everybody quiet! He called out over the noise. The noise lowered, but there were still a few people muttering to each other. Now, one question at a time, he said as he looked over them sternly. Betty Ann held up a hand. Peter nodded to her. Yeah? Does Mai belong to any of the Avengers? She asked eagerly. Everybody was suddenly quiet, wanting to know the answer. Peter swallowed. No? That sounded like such a lie, Abraham called out. Peter shook his head rapidly. No, seriously, she doesn't. Who does she belong to, then? Cindy pushed. Peter shrugged. Just a friend? Yeah, but who? Betty Ann pressed even more. Peter opened his mouth, but nothing came up. MJ was right. He was such a shit liar. They were all gonna find out and tease him mercilessly, and Flash was gonna have a field day. She's my aunt's, Harley said, walking back into the room. She and my uncle went to the Caribbean for their anniversary. My mom would have watched her, but she's a little busy with work, so now Peter and I have her. He grinned. Ain't that a scoop? He added with a grin. Most everyone slumped at that. Finding out she was just Harley's cousin wasn't as exciting as the prospect of her being a secret love child of an Avenger. So she's just your cousin? Betty Ann repeated with a sigh. Harley nodded. Yep. Now if you excuse us, I need Peter for a moment. He didn't wait for a reply, merely tugging Peter into the kitchen. What, Harley? Peter breathed out in shock. Hey, I saw you were getting worked up, Harley replied, sitting him down next to Mai on the island. Just take a few breaths, okay? He added, setting a glass of water in front of him. Peter rolled his eyes, but his heart warmed at the obvious concern his boyfriend was showing him. Peter, Ned called as he entered the room. Harley nodded to him. Hey. Peter glanced over nervously. Hey? Ned rolled his eyes. I'm not gonna stab you or anything. Peter's lip twitched. I know, but I still feel bad for lying. Harley added, "And if you did stab him, I know 10 different ways to hide a body," he chirped brightly. Ned turned wide eyes on him. "What?" "He's lying," Peter reassured. "Yeah, I only know about 6, but I'm sure I can figure out even more." Ned looked a little green. "Oh," Peter huffed. "Can you not?" "I can, but it's just so much fun," Harley snickered. Mai gave him a high five, giggling to herself. "Fun!" Peter turned over dramatic eyes on her. "Betrayal!" he gasped, slamming a hand on his chest. "I knew it. She loves me more," Harley snickered. Mai shook her head. "Both," she chirped. Peter smiled at her. "You love both of us?" he repeated. Mai nodded with a happy grin on her lips. Harley cooed. "You were so adorable." He swung her up into a hug, causing her to laugh even more. Peter watched them with a soft look on his face. Ned cleared his throat a little awkwardly. Pete?" Peter jerked in surprise, turning wide eyes on Ned. "Oh, right, sorry." He grinned sheepishly. Ned smiled, amused and slightly bewildered. "It's fine." Peter shook his head. "It's not." Peter sighed. He hesitated. "The reason I didn't tell you..." He trailed off. Ned was patiently waiting, knowing his best friend was probably anxious. "I didn't tell you because I was nervous," Peter finally spit out. "I mean, I knew you'd be fine with it. Totally. I mean, you're my best friend after all. So you would definitely be fine with it. I didn't doubt that for a second. I promise, I would never." "Rambling, Peter. You're rambling," Harley interrupted gently. Mai nodded in agreement. "Talking lots." Peter flushed in embarrassment. "Right. Sorry." Ned furrowed his brows. "If you weren't worried about my reaction, then why didn't you tell me?" Peter grimaced. He glanced at Harley. Peter grimaced. He glanced at Harley. "We got together last April," Harley stated for his boyfriend. "They've been together that long?" Ned thought in surprise. It was almost November. "And?" Ned asked. He didn't get why the date they got together mattered. Harley glanced pointedly at Peter, who turned to look down at the table. "Do you remember what happened near the end of April?" Harley asked. Ned tilted his head in thought. "What happened in April? All I remember was..." Ned's eyes widened. Oh, Peter, I'm sorry," Ned breathed, turning to his friend in shock. Peter looked up with an uneasy smile. "It's not your fault. It hit me hard. He took a shaky breath. "I just didn't want to think about it. I was gonna tell you, that week actually, but May." Ned nodded in understanding. "No, it's cool. I totally get it." "Still, I should have told you sooner," Peter insisted. I just could never find the time. And I suppose I was kind of nervous about telling you," he admitted. Ned smiled. "It's cool," he repeated. "I'm happy for you." "Oh, but Harley..." Ned turned to him with narrowed eyes. "You hurt him, and I will ruin me," Harley suggested with a laugh. "Don't worry, I love him too much." He winked pointedly at Peter, who flushed. "Harley!" His boyfriend just laughed at him. Chapter 4. Last chapter. Still, I should have told you sooner, Peter insisted. I just could never find the time, and I suppose I was kind of nervous about telling you, he admitted. Ned smiled. It's cool, he repeated. I'm happy for you. Oh, but Harley. Ned turned with narrow eyes. You will hurt him, and I will ruin me, he suggested with a laugh. Don't worry, I love him too much. He winked pointedly at Peter, who flushed. Harley! His boyfriend just laughed at him. Hey, nerds, MJ said as she walked into the kitchen. MJ, did you need something? Peter asked. MJ shrugged. Those idiots out there are being annoying. How so? Harley asked as she handed Mai a napkin. The little girl had somehow gotten chocolate all over her face. MJ hummed. They're suggesting we play a game, she stated. Peter furrowed his brows. What game? He wasn't sure if he really wanted to know. It's a toss between Truth or Dare and Mario Kart, she replied as she slipped onto the chair on the other side of Peter and snatched a cookie off the plate. Oh, crap. He glanced sheepishly at Mai before turning back to MJ. Please tell me they chose Mario Kart, Peter pleaded. MJ's lip twitched upwards. Mr. Harrington was pretty clear we couldn't play any inappropriate games, especially since there is a little kid here. She nodded towards Mai. Peter sighed in relief. Remind me to thank Mr. Harrington. I'm sure it wouldn't have been that bad, Ned said, trying to be positive. Peter gave him a deadpan look. Ned sheepishly laughed. Okay, yeah, point. He relented. We gonna play Mario? Mai interrupted. Her brown eyes lit up with excitement. Do you want to play? Peter asked, leaning over absently to brush crumbs off of her face. Mai nodded eagerly. Sounds fun, she exclaimed, bouncing her in her seat. Harley reached over and set a hand on her shoulder to still her so she wouldn't fall. She pouted but settled down. Harley quirked a small grin at her before he shrugged. I wouldn't mind kicking some ass at Mario Kart. Peter hurriedly pressed his hands over Mai's ears. Language! He gasped out dramatically. MJ rolled her eyes. Like you haven't already cursed in front of her. She's got you there, Harley snickered. What? Shut up, Peter snapped, his cheeks pink. Aw, you're so cute when you're flustered, Harley cooed, tapping his nose with a finger. Ass, Peter muttered in fond annoyance. Mai giggled, even though Peter was sure she couldn't hear. They headed out to the living room, Mai running ahead to jump onto the couch. Yoshi, Yoshi, she yelled enthusiastically, bouncing where she sat. We have to put it on first, Mai, Peter reminded her gently. We gonna play Mario then? Cindy asked. Peter grimaced. Might as well. Harley grinned. You're just upset because you suck at this game. Peter sniffed. I don't suck, after a beat he added. I lose on purpose. Sure, Jan, Harley said with a nod. Friday, start Mario Kart, Peter stated, ignoring his boyfriend. Harley snickered as he sat down next to Mai. He's a sore loser, Harley stage whispered to her. Mai giggled. Loser, she agreed with the same mock whisper. Peter looked at her with a pout. I am not. How mean, Mai. Mai giggled again. Loser, she repeated, louder this time, lit up with amusement. MJ snorted. Even she knows. Mai gave her a once-over before smiling brightly and saying, "You're really pretty." MJ flushed lightly. "Ah, thank you," she replied, slightly flustered. Ned looked at her with wide eyes. Is the Michelle M.J. Jones blushing? "Peter, the world is ending." "Oh no! Everyone duck and cover!" Peter shouted as he tossed a couple of controllers to different people, earning a few snickers. MJ swatted Ned over the head with her book. "Shut up, nerds." "Yeah, nerds," Mai playfully added. "I'd like you." MJ ruffled her hair as she brushed past her to sit on the floor. A smile twitched at her lips. "If I wasn't so scared by you actually smiling, I would be telling you not to teach her such things," Peter informed her. MJ scoffed. "As if she hadn't heard worse from you," she reminded him. Betty Ann smiled. "She's adorable, though," she said. "Careful, she looks harmless, but she has made 2 grown men cry already," Harley warned lightly. Mai shrugged. "Creeps," she stated blandly. Peter and Harley shared a look before laughing. "I feel like I missed something," Abraham stated. "Don't we all?" Lucas replied. Cindy tilted her head. "Don't they almost seem like a family?" she wondered aloud. Flash scoffed, but was cut off before he could say something. It was probably an insult anyway, knowing him. "Nobody cares what you think, Flash," Cindy snapped at him. Flash narrowed his eyes at her, his mouth open to retort when a loud clap cut him off again. "All right, let's all play Mario Kart, huh?" Mr. Harrington interrupted loudly. "I want Yoshi." Mai started jumping up and down on the cushion once more. "You remember how to play, right, Mai?" Peter asked, as he handed the Spider-Man themed controller to her. Mai had claimed it as hers about a month ago when Thor foolishly agreed to play with her. Suffice to say, Mai won 9-1, the one being her getting second and not from Thor actually winning the game. Thor still pouts about it when reminded. She nodded, her eyes bright. "Banana!" Peter huffed. "That's the 3rd time in 10 seconds. He whined as he came in last place. He tossed his controller over to Abraham with an annoyed frown. "Get better then," MJ stated loudly, though there was a suspicious twitch to her lips. Harley laughed. "Peter, get at Mario Kart? Never." Peter glared petulantly at him. "Boyfriends are supposed to be supportive," he stated. "Aw, babe, I am supportive." Harley's eyes twinkled as he added, "Supportive of kicking your ass at Mario Kart." MJ snorted, and a couple of his classmates snickers. Peter flushed. "You're such an He glanced briefly at Mai. Jerk. Yep." Mai wasn't even paying him any attention, though. Her eyes were locked onto the TV as the next race started. So far, she's won the last 4 games and came in second twice. Harley pulled Peter into his arms. "Sorry." "No, you're not," Peter huffed, even as he relaxed against Harley. "You're right. I'm not. It's just so much fun watching you pout when you lose," Harley murmured into his ear. A smile twitched at Peter's lips. Of course. You would find that funny." "Adorable, more like," Harley replied with a smirk. Peter glanced up at him with a smile. "You're such an idiot." The fondness in his tone defied the room comment. "You're idiot. So you better keep an eye on me so I don't do anything stupid." Harley winked with a flirty smile. Peter huffed a laugh. Oh my god, you guys are so cute, it's disgusting. MJ interrupted as she looked them over with a grimace. The glint of fond amusement in her eyes, though, showed otherwise. Peter flushed bright red when he realized a lot of his class were staring at the both of them. He trailed off in embarrassment. Harley snickered. We're definitely couple goes, he crowed. Harley, Peter lightly nudged him, his cheeks resembling an apple. Peter looked over towards them with a frown. Harley quirked a brow at him. Something to say, Eugene? Flash's eyebrow twitched. It's Flash, and yeah, I do. Tony looked up from where she was reading one of Peter's fantasy books. No bullying, she reminded him. Everyone's attention flickered between the two of them, the only noise being Mario Kart music in the background as someone paused it. Even Mai had moved, so she was sitting between Peter and Harley, her eyes glancing back and forth uneasily as she unconsciously gripped Harley's shirt and Peter's hand. Mr. Harrington had unfortunately just left for the bathroom, which was probably the only reason Flash chose now to start a fight, despite Tony being there. Peter worried his bottom lip, on edge. Flash stood up, a scowl on his face, as he stared Harley down. Who the fuck even are you? Peter works here. Fine. I hate it, but it's obviously true. But you? Why the fuck would Tony Stark hire you? You're a nobody. First off, language. Maya's still in the room. Second, you don't even know me. So why do you think you get to decide whether or not I'm worthy of being hired by Tony? Harley was obviously trying to keep his cool, his voice staying level even as Peter felt him tense up next to him. I think if you were really worth it, somebody would know who you are. Anybody? Flash glanced around a moment before nodding. See? Nobody knows you. And I'm sure the only people outside this room who have any idea who you are the people your daddy pays to write your homework. Oh wait, you would actually have good grades if he did. My bad. Harley shot back sarcastically. Flash sneered. What the fuck did you just say to me? He took a step forward. Harley merely stared back. You heard me, Eugene. Flash narrowed his eyes. You piece of shit. That is enough. Tony stood up, setting her book down on her chair before walking over to Flash. How many times do I have to tell you, kids? She swept her gaze through the crowd. You may have forgotten, but you are currently in Stark Tower. Her voice was stern as she spoke. It is an honor to be able to walk these halls, and you spend it bullying and making snide comments about two of its employees. Her gaze snapped back to Flash, eyes narrowed. You are lucky that the building is on lockdown, or else you would find yourself back on the bus home in an instant. Do not come here with petty jealousy and crude remarks. Flash looked genuinely abashed, even if he still had a glint of annoyance in his eyes. He opened his mouth to probably retort when Tony cut him off. No, I have told you time and time again that bullying is not allowed here. And time again, you have disregarded that rule. Flash pressed his lips together. You, Eugene Thompson, are no longer allowed in Stark Industries, nor any of its buildings ever again. Flash stared at her in surprise. You can't do that, he stammered. I can. If someone breaks the rules 3 times, they are kicked out of the building. If someone breaks the rule 5 times, They are banned from the building. If they break more than that, and or attack the employees of SI, be it physically or verbally, they are banned from all Stark Industry buildings, effective immediately. Page 15, paragraph 3 of the Stark Industries Guidelines, Tony stated. You, Eugene Thompson, have both verbally and physically abused 2 employees and have broken the rules no less than 10 times since you stepped into this building. And yes, I'm counting all those not-so-quiet remarks you have made about Peter when he wasn't around. That's... Flash opened and closed his mouth a couple of times in shock. Not what I wanted to walk into, a voice called from the direction of the elevator. Everyone jerked their head in surprise. A few gasped in shock when their gaze landed on Tony Stark himself. Mr. Stark, Peter stammered. How long have you been there? He asked in shock. Long enough. Tony's gaze landed on Flash. Now, Mr. Thompson, was it? Flash stalked forward. I don't quite like it when some smug bass... Language, Peter interrupted, tugging a narrow-eyed and frowning Mai onto his lap. She didn't like the way Flash was insulting Peter and Harley either, it seemed. Tony cleared his throat. Some smug jerk, then. He glanced briefly at Peter, who nodded. Some smug jerk coming into my company and insulting my employees. More so when that same bass jerk, he corrected again at Peter's narrowed eyes, has been verbally and physically abusing one of those employees for years. Flash rapidly paled. Oh yes, I know all about that, despite Pete's best attempts. The only reason I hadn't done anything was because Peter himself was defending you. Flash swallowed thickly. Mr. Stark, get out of my sight. You will never be able to work in a Stark Industries building or any partner building from now on. You will be rejected no matter how many times you apply. Flash's eyes bulged, but you should have thought of that before you started bullying my son. Tony narrowed his eyes. Leave, now. When Flash still didn't move, Tony glanced over at a motionless Harrington. Take him downstairs. I'll have my security watch him while you and the rest of your class finishes the tour. Yes, of course. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, with me? But Flash moved to protest. Now, Mr. Thompson, unless you want a month of detentions, too. Mr. Harrington snapped, heading over to the elevator. Flash huffed, but also headed over to the elevator, a scowl on his face. Mai, what are you doing? The little girl slipped from Peter's lap and was standing in front of Flash before he could stop her. Flash looked down at her with furrowed brows. What do you want? Jerk. Mai kicked him hard in the shin. Flash went down with a cry of pain. Fucking, Flash cried out. How the fuck are you that strong? He complained, wincing as he grabbed his leg. Right, let's go then, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Harrington said after a brief, surprised pause. He glanced briefly at Mai, but she just smiled smugly right back. Nobody spoke until the elevator doors closed and the number started descending. Mai took the time to walk back over to Peter and slip into his lap again. He could see quite a few people trying to stifle laughter. Harley being one of them. Peter sighed as Mai shared a high five with Harley. Tony cleared her throat, pure amusement in her expression as she looked over to meet her male counterpart. "Mr. Stark," she greeted. "Miss Wright," Tony replied mockingly, his whole stance relaxing, and within the minute he was grinning at Peter's classmates. "Pete's class, not the way I meant to meet you, but certainly an interesting one," he laughed. Peter groaned. "Please don't embarrass me." He suddenly tensed as a thought hit him. He glanced behind Tony, worriedly. "Dad, where are the others?" he asked weakly. "Why?" Tony asked as he gave him a mock look of innocence. Peter groaned again. "If Flash ends up traumatized, I'm telling Mom," he warned. "Where do you think Pepper is?" Tony instantly retorted with a smug grin. Harley looked impressed. "Remind me never to piss you off. You can't just leave him down there with a group of superhumans, trained assassins, and Pepper," Peter stated with a look of pure horror on his face. "Better than leaving him up here with old Snakeface. He wouldn't have lasted a second longer," Tony replied, jerking a thumb at Tony. "By the way, you should choose an employee who is actually scheduled to work next time." Peter blinked a couple of times. "What?" He turned to Tony, who suddenly looked very familiar, even with blue eyes. "Loki?" he yelped. Tony, Loki, smiled. "Hello, Peter." She then rolled her eyes at Tony. "I wouldn't have killed him. That would have been too kind. Also, I like this Miss Guardian. She's certainly more interesting than any of your other employees." Tony rolled his eyes at the god of mischief. "That must be why you were on edge all day," Harley stated quietly to Peter. "Loki!" Mai squealed, jumping off the couch and running over to Loki, who had seamlessly shifted back into his male form. "Hello again, small Midgardian," Loki greeted, pulling her up into his arms. "How have you been?" he asked. "Good," Mai giggled. "Played Mario. Can you make the butterflies again?" she asked with an excited smile. "Of course," Loki replied, and with a wave of his hands, a flock of brightly colored butterflies emerged, sweeping around the room. "Oh, come on! Not in the building!" Tony complained, swatting at one that flew a little too close to his face. Loki and Mai shared a grin. Tony had only a moment to realize he shouldn't have said anything before the butterflies changed course and started chasing him throughout the room. "Peter," Cindy suddenly commented after a few minutes of watching the Tony Stark yelling and cursing as he ran around ducking brightly colored butterflies. "Your life is so weird," she breathed out in a mixture of shock and amusement. Peter pressed a hand against his temple. "I wish this wasn't a normal occurrence." Harley couldn't stop laughing.